So thank you again, Howard, and over to you.
Great. Thanks, Paul. We don't have too many members, Deb, so I'm wondering if it was just bad advertising or whether not many people like documents and content.
Could be based on both.
Alrighty. Okay, so I think I may have told the story once before, but I worked for IBM and I was desperate to go and do some traveling, go overseas, and I volunteered for any Red Book writing session I could, and I got this really interesting Red Book session on documenting a token ring network card. And I spent 8 weeks trying to write a book on a network token ring card, and it was one of those that I really had to work hard at getting excited about. I finally got it right at the end of the 8 weeks, but that's sort of, I suppose, the approach one has to take when you're dealing with important stuff or things that you have to do. The best way to do is to get interested and excited. So document and content is one of those. I must admit, my approach has changed somewhat since I've started doing some work on knowledge graphs, ontologies, and textual analytics, and then it's become a super exciting environment. And I really think that it helps us all to understand what this is all about. And I've labeled the actual title of How to Know Your Content. And that's the sort of question that I have for all of you is, if we think of the fact that our documents can take up our documents, emails, websites, all those type of things, the unstructured data actually represents 80% of the document or the storage that we use. But how much do we know of what we have? You know, so how well do we know the content that we have? And certainly Papaya came along and scared most of us into trying to get to understand these document stores and everything so that we can manage it. So how do we know our content? How do we get to know our content? And I think that's almost the exciting part of documented content chapter, is learning about the tips and techniques of content management. So just before we go into that, this is the EMEA conference. It starts on the 1st of December. I think it's a two-day conference. And it's the important thing, I suppose, for all of you is that it's free to any EMEA chapter. And so this is what we consider to be EMEA. There's South Africa down the bottom here, and then we've got all of Europe and
Howard,
yes.
Your slides are not showing.
Oh, wow. Sorry, thanks, Debs. Thanks for...
No stress.
Sure, everyone was quiet. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so this is what it is. There's 22 chapters that are being represented, 25 countries and 2,000 members just within EMEA. This is the first conference. It's going to be focusing on data strategy, on data policies, technology, and people. There's quite a big stream of people discussions. I know I'll be presenting on that side as well. And as I said earlier on, it's free to any EMEA chapter member. So what you will find, and I know Dai was talking earlier on, when you log on, you can then see the actual, you register, and part of it will ask you which chapter do you belong to, and then they come and ask us, they'll come to me and ask us if we know you and you're a member. So this is the other ability is then sponsoring a European conference. It should actually be an EMEA conference. They missed out Africa here. So it's about setting up the network opportunities. Debs, would you care to update Ruth on, she should phrase this as EMEA, not just Europe. Okay. So these are some of the ideas. If you are interested as a company in sponsoring it, there's lots of networking opportunities, getting your brand out there, especially if you provide data management services or products. That's quite helpful to share it with all the attendees. I think there's quite a lot of people that are attending basically due to the fact that it's free, and there's some good discussions that will be held. Okay, so this is the EMEA. These are our forming chapters. You can see we've got Botswana and Egypt, and certainly it's one of my goals is to try to fill in the blanks here. There's lots of blanks in Africa. We've only got one existing one, but we've got two that are forming. That's Botswana and Egypt. So that's looking forward to that. And we're actually going to Saudi. I'm going to Saudi tomorrow. And hopefully we can meet some of them and help them encourage to get that going. All right. So knowledgeable content. This is the session for this month. Once again, we're dealing with the essential concepts, which are for everybody. We then work on the data management, managing knowledge, and then the data citizens, defining knowledge, and then data professionals, achieving the knowledgeable content. So how do we get to a point where we have knowledgeable content and we can actually make use of it? And then, of course, it's the executives that ensure that that knowledge is an asset within the organization, and people right from the top see the value of that. Okay, so let's go to the essential concepts of document and content, and I'd like to focus on the content because the document is really just the container, but we'll get to those definitions now. So the definition as defined by the DMBOK, so this is really the essential concepts as defined by the DMBOK. So the definition of it is of content management is the planning, implementation, control activities for lifecycle management of data and information found in any form or medium. That definition is a little bit wide. It certainly doesn't deal with information sitting in our relational databases. So I'd prefer to really say that it entails controlling the capture, storage, access, and use of data and information outside of relational databases. So it could be your lakes and your warehouses, not your warehouses, but your content management systems. So the other way I like to see document and content, or like to define it, is it's actually data storage and operations for documents. Hopefully that makes sense. So the same as we would have DBMSs for relational database, we've got document and content management, and that's we have to manage the storage of those documents. And one may think, it's everything just about putting it into SharePoint. That's a very simplistic approach. There's a lot more to it than that, but SharePoint is one of those tools that help us do it. So let's get to a more definitive definition of what these different areas are, and I actually break them up into three, or DMBOK breaks them up into three. Document management, which is storage of electronic and paper documents. Records management is a specialized form of document management that focuses on records. And I'm sure you guys know that a record is the published version. Okay, it's published, it means that it's public. And what we have to do with records management that make it so important is it's non-tamperable, right? So once you've got a record, the records manager has to ensure that that record does not get changed. If you go into a court case or something like that, you have to be able to prove that that record wasn't changed and it hasn't been changed. Similar with e-discovery, if you have a legal agreement that you set up with partners or whatever it is, they will define what's called preservation data, and they'll define how you preserve those records. And then we have content management, which is where I keep on hopping on that term. And this is where I get really excited, which is organizing, categorizing, and structure information resources so that they can be stored, published, and reused in multiple ways. Okay, so if we go one step further, we basically see that our documents are really just containers of content. And then we have records that, again, they stretch across both areas. And we have knowledge as well that can stretch across almost our relational data and our content. Together, this creates our information. And then we have this continuum of what people refer to as unstructured data and structured data. Lots of people are arguing that unstructured is not an appropriate term because there's structuring just about everything. And I'd actually like to show you in terms of how structured our content is, and that we shouldn't be running away from that content. There are ways of extracting that and making it presentable, searchable, and usable within our information landscape. Okay, so you can't just think of data and data to information. We must take care of this content and feed it into our environment for decision making. Okay, so what are the goals? The goals are to comply with legal obligations and customer expectations regarding records management. That's why it's important in terms of the records management. So you could have multiple versions of a document before it becomes a record. And really what you want to do is pay attention to that final record, and that's the one that you have to look after from a legal point of view and a customer expectation. Okay. Now, the other side, so that's typically what I see as the data management or the content management manager has to take care of this goal. We then got the next goal, which is to ensure effective and efficient storage and retrieval and use of documents and content. That's where I believe our citizen helps us tremendously in terms of defining this ability to make use of these documents and content. And then we've got the professional that needs to ensure the integration capabilities between structured and unstructured content. And I'm sure you guys, when we spoke on our data warehousing one, and I presented the Barry Devlin, that book that he had on business unintelligence, where he brings all of these things together and he builds a bridge between our structured and unstructured content. Now, not many of us are doing this, and I really feel the urgency that we start getting to bring these together. The business drivers, of course, are regulatory compliance, papaya. This is probably the hard part of especially when we're paper-based, of dealing with papaya, knowing what paper documents we have of our customers, what they're saying, our ability to respond to litigation. We must have the records. We must know what was e-discovery. If we get into these agreements up front, we then have to ensure that any document or record or content that relates to the terms and conditions of e-discovery are managed and controlled. So you don't want to destroy or purge something that's been agreed on an e-discovery level. And these are really helpful things. So what this does is that lawyers will come to an agreement, and if there's a question from any party, they expect you to make these documents and that available to them in form of e-discovery. So it is an important aspect that we need to deal with. Business continuity, I think that's also what I find quite important. People refer to as critical documents, and then they would label any document that affects our business continuity. So if we have a disaster, can we recreate the business? And can we reestablish it? So that's an important view on it. Business efficiency and customer satisfaction. I still remember doing some work with the Reserve Bank, and it was almost 3 years ago where people started questioning that amalgamation with Absa and relationship to Santam Bank, which happened in the 90s. And they really battled to find the documents that they required, because what had happened, they put everything in SharePoint. Someone had restructured the sites, and they had lost their references to those SharePoint sites. So that was a really scary time period. I managed to get everything sorted out, and it was a big relief. But then it was a view of, shucks, we have to do a much better job of this, and that cost efficiency tremendously. Customer satisfaction, of course, that's helpful that you know where the customer's documents are and you can refer to them and you don't have to ask all those questions again repeatedly. Okay, so this is something I put together. I really liked the work that Laura Sebastian Coleman did in navigating the labyrinth in terms of summarizing the DMBOK, and she built this lifecycle management. This is what I have done in terms of it was missing from her document, so I've put it together. So when we, just to give you an example, when we plan, it's defining the content strategy, the metadata, and the information architecture. That's what's required in terms of records management, document management, design and enable, defining the P3T, principles, policies, procedures, and technology for documents and content, and establishing metadata required for the development of controlled vocabularies. That's what happens in the design and enable. Now, interestingly enough, whenever I look for a life cycle for documents, they typically start over here, and these two aspects are missing. And so you'll see most of your document management systems talk about creating and obtaining documents, taking them in from whichever system it has, people's folders, digital, making digital copies, getting them in, storing and maintaining, ensuring the quality of the metadata that describes it, building preservation data, and then provenance functions as well. So what's the reliability of the authors that have published these documents? That's another important thing. You can't just look at the document and take it for gospel, but who published it and what is their reputation? And then there's this manage and preserve. We all know about disposal. When we get those retention schedules, can we dispose the documents? Design and implement interfaces for users to obtain and interact with data. That's a lot of that is about search, the search functionality, and of course the library system to be able to access this information. And then enhancing is linking data sets with publications and contextualizing content using descriptive and semantic metadata. I learned about this thing almost, wow, in the 2000s, where I worked on a system called RIXML, which is referring to, and it's still going at the moment, but it's research documents for financial markets, financial instruments. So you'll have analysts that make recommendations. They make it to their people, to the people that they support, in the hope that they would come to them and ask them to place a certain order, the trade with them. And so we then built this whole document and content management system using RIXML, where we would extract the most important metadata from those documents and allow people to search. And we worked extensively on linking our data to the publication. So what were the trades, anything around the information contained in those research documents. Fantastic experience. I think it took me almost 2 years where we worked on building an RIXML content system that would enable the brokers to manage their research. Those things are quite expensive. They really get upset with you if you have this document and send it to friends. And they've even got ways of as you open it, it contacts their server and tells them who opened the document. So they are quite passionate about the correct usage of this data and publications. They spend a lot of time, they support research people that analyze different financial instruments. And this is what you have to do within document and content management. Okay, so this is EMEA. From EMEA, they have something called the Generally Accepted Record Keeping Principles. I really like that. So you've got GARP, you've got GAIP, you've got GARP, and these are the core principles for record keeping. accountability, integrity, and it goes to talk a lot to what we were talking about with with I in terms of you see a lot of the data quality things coming into here. Compliance, availability, accessibility, retention, disposition. This is quite important when you do dispose of something. It's the amount of record keeping that has to happen. And then you've got transparency. The processes are all understood. So these are important key concepts that you have to establish in your record management and content management. Okay, so let's go to the essential concepts of document and content. So document is to content what a bucket is to water. It's basically your container. So very similar to a database management system and a table that contains rows. So document and row or document and table are synonymous. Content refers to the data and information inside of the file, document or website. Okay. Then we have content has a life cycle and can become an official record. So we have to be careful of that, and we have to manage it through its life cycle to the point where it may be thrown away, it may be rejected, or it may become an official record within the organization. Just a simple thing like approving minutes of a meeting, that takes that document from a document to a record, and it's that agreed minutes of the meeting that becomes a record. All the other versions are not important. Content management, process techniques for organizing and categorizing and structuring information resources. Content metadata, it's essential for managing unstructured data and big data. So when we define metadata and we want to know the content, when we want to know what's inside of this, it's the content metadata that helps us. Content modeling, it's that process of converting logical content concepts into content types, attributes, and data types with relationships. And we're using metadata and data modeling techniques. So this is a way of almost modeling our ontology or our namespace, our taxonomy, or what we refer to as controlled vocabularies. And we'll build those elements, and then that would go into something like a knowledge graph or an RPA or a machine learning process to teach the machine as well. Content delivery methods, we can convert to XML early to enable reuse. And that was amazing, the level of reuse we experienced with research documents. So what we were then able to do with that RI XML was we could then track an analyst in terms of what they had been saying over the last year and how did that relate to the change of the financial instruments. So how correct was this analysis? That got a little bit tense at some stages where we explained that we were starting to monitor them, but some people enjoyed it. Okay, controlled vocabularies. This is really important. I think for me, it's the most exciting part of documents and content. And it also then links to metadata. You can't separate these two. And here we can actually see that it may be considered reference data and metadata, those controlled vocabularies. So it's the list of explicitly allowed terms to index, categorize, tag, sort, retrieve content through browsing and sorting. Okay. So this is sort of how we now start making use and start understanding our content, is if we've defined a controlled vocabulary, we can then say, we could then search the document and say, well, do these tags exist in the document? And we can automatically tag it, and we're not dependent on users finding the right thing or cataloging it correctly. Debbie, did you want to say something, Debs?
No, sorry. It was just my cat.
Oh, okay. All right. Vocabulary management, it's that defining, sourcing, importing, and maintaining any given vocabulary. There's a really nice ISO model that helps you control these vocabularies. So if you are interested in building a database of these models, I've got a model, an ISO model that helps us define this. the purpose of vocabulary control is consistency. Okay, so it's similar to your business glossary, but it's a lot more complex than that, and I'd like to just show you how complex it can become. Okay, so you can also get micro-controlled vocabularies, right? So we can pay attention to just certain domains, not everything. We can pay attention to a subject area within the business. If it's got 12 or 15, we can then have that micro-control and allow our owners and our stewards to handle some of the controlling of the vocabulary, of course, with certain collaboration and techniques like that. Okay, so here is our semantic chain. And really what we're trying to do is look for more meaning. Okay, so we've got really weak semantics when all we have is just Word and HTML. Okay, then we get better semantics when we start progressing to a glossary and a thesaurus. And in that stage, we can almost look at the same time with the type of technologies that can be used to express those semantic artifacts as well. We then go into a controlled vocabulary. An enterprise data model is sort of one step up from controlled vocabulary. We then get into taxonomies and ontologies. And so this is how our meaning enhances. Each time we take another step, we're getting more meaning that we've got. And that's what we're really looking for. And then on this side, these are the appropriate technologies that can be used. For example, OWL is one of those that you can take an ontology and define a machine-readable definition of the ontology. Now, this surely should excite us all, because once we've got a machine-readable definition, a business glossary of our domain, we can then ingest the documents, and we can start understanding what they are saying and what the documents are talking about. And we can start building knowledge graphs that reflect what that is. Debbie.
Hi.
You on mute? Yes.
Yes. What does ontology mean?
Oh, yeah, good question, Debs. Lots of people gloss over that, and I think it's actually really important to take a step back and understand, what does an ontology mean? Why do we get so much semantics from an ontology? So that's a good question, and it's always the best question is one that is described on the next slide, and it's Greek for, this is what it is, ontos, which is meaning the being, what is, what exists, and logos is the study. Okay, so it's a study of what is and what exists. And I like this diagram, which almost is, from a semantic point of view, we can formalize the content, we can express and structure our content with granularity. And so we can pick up documents that talk about stuff and things, and then have the relationships between stuff and things. So it's a fascinating development of these ontologies, where your root object is something called a thing, or in some cases people call it the stuff. But what we'll do is we then take these domains and we'll define an ontology for a domain. And we'll give it context, and we can also give it reasoning in terms of how to infer and defer meaning from statements. And I really loved the session with Bill Inman, where we did textual analytics, where he focused a lot of time on saying, guys, one word doesn't help you understand meaning. Okay, you have to operate almost sentence then paragraph to have a complete meaning of the context that you were talking in and what you were saying. So when you actually interpret call center documents or whatever it is, call center words or audio or even Word documents, you've got to look at the sentence and at the paragraph. Only then do you get the complete meaning from it. You cannot work just at a word level, which typically is what your glossary and your thesaurus mean that talks about, right? So they'll talk about this is a word, this is the definition, and this is how it relates to other words. Now, ontologies try to operate at a much higher level, and they'll bring in all sorts of other elements. Does that answer your question, Debbie?
Yes, thank you so much. I understand.
Okay. All right, so I don't know if there's anybody else. What I like about this separation is there's a semantic definition. And interestingly enough, this was done by philosophers who established these ontologies of areas of philosophy. And then what would happen is when someone submitted a paper, they would actually take that paper and compare it to their ontology. Now, the nice thing about that was that it would, if there were things that were mentioned in that ontology that no one really understood, then they can say, oh, shucks, we didn't understand this. So has this paper introduced something new, or has it introduced some falsehoods that they're not sure of? So that's a really nice ability that we can now ingest documents into a corpus, and using something like that, we can come up with 2 or 3 answers. One being, this document is talking about stuff that we don't know. So is it a problem that we're not? So they've actually, for example, if it starts to mention relationships between 2 concepts, what do they know that we don't know? Or maybe they're not telling us the truth. And we can then work on an exception basis of discovering what is there. And when we take the universe approach to it being a domain, we can then really spend a lot of time defining what that domain is made up of and what relationships are true to that domain. Now, any of you guys work in the finance area, there's something called FIBO, which is the financial industry business ontology. And then interestingly enough, they've got FIRO, which is the financial industry regulatory ontology, which defines the compliance rules of a FIBO. So the nice thing about that is they ingest all the data that comes from the different banks. They ingest it into an ontology, a FIBO ontology, and then they run FIRO over that to pick up where they have possible non-compliance issues. So, I mean, I just know and see how much manual effort it takes to enforce compliance. And so these are the type of automation that the people are applying and trying to find out. Okay, so let's go down into almost that development of controlled vocabularies. We've got terms and pick lists, associated tags with documents that I'm sure you guys know that you add it to SharePoint and you just choose a tag to describe the document. And we've got the term management. There's anti-definitions that look at equivalent terms. What are the relationships? Is there a hierarchical relationship? And how do we relate these different terms together? Okay, then we've got a synonym ring. Here's an example of a synonym ring. So all of these words are expressing the same thing. Netherlands, Nederland, the Koninkrijk van Nederlanden, Netherlands, the Kingdom of, and the Kingdom of Netherlands. So this is the synonym ring. We go down to a next level is authority list. So a controlled vocabulary of descriptive terms designed within a specific domain. And it cross-references all your synonyms, and it has an owner. It must have an owner. And the next element is that of controlled schemes and tagging. We then progress to the taxonomies. Now we're getting more and more advanced, and I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, where we have a flat taxonomy or a hierarchical taxonomy, a polyhierarchy, a faceted taxonomy, which is very close to an ontology, and then we have a network taxonomy. So notice all these different structures that we had, and I'm sure most of you, before reading something like this, you'd see taxonomy. That's almost like a gene definition, and it's a sort of our parenthood or our family tree, where we just talk about all the different families. Or if there's a species definition, that's the sort of one that we would typically relate to. But a polyhierarchy means that you can have different facets or different structures and you can have these terms appearing in different structures. And hopefully I'll get to show you an example of that. So this is, and then we get into a thesaurus and an ontology, and we see us increasing the complexity. Okay, can you see the complexity increasing? Controlled vocabularies on their own at the simple level, they try to reduce ambiguity. Synonyms introduce synonym control, taxonomies, ambiguity, synonym, and hierarchies. And then ontology is all of the above, plus your associative relationships. And I'll give you some examples of that as well. But can you see how it's getting more and more complex in terms of what our understanding is of the relationships between business concepts and business terms? And I'm sure those who have done lots of business glossary work, you're sort of almost sitting at this level, and there's another piece of work that has to go to get you all the way to the top. Okay, so just let's make it a little bit more practical, so we've got all of these fancy ontologies and taxonomies, and then what we need to do is we need to go and read a document and make sure we understand it. So here is something that I wanted to just quickly share with you. There's this concept called the subject predicate object, and they can work through the structure of the English language, and they can look at the different subject predicate objects, and they say, all right, this subject refers to a person or an organization or a location or a publication. And it then starts to look at the links between these different concepts. So it's fascinating how one can get so much understanding of what's in a document. And I'm sure many of you that haven't seen this before, you're fascinated in terms of saying, wow, I've certainly tried to parse documents using code before, but I've never been able to develop this relationship between information that's been expressed in the document. And if we see this, we're now picking up all sorts of elements that we can. This is the publisher of, who published this, and then, who authored it. So this was done by COD. That's a person, and this is quite amazing. These are publications. We can see the details in that document. And this is real. I mean, I was involved in something in the Reserve Bank where they wanted to interpret everything that was spoken about in the world about the South African economy or areas that we were dependent on. They wanted to go through all of these documents and make sense of what's been saying, because they actually, I'm not sure whether they almost hire people to spend the morning reading papers and research to be able to understand what's going on. And something like this can be a lot more effective. So just to go along with you, this is a simplistic graph database of, if I was to bring in something that was written about BMWs, I could see, right, I've got these relationships between a BMW and X2, the 228, and both of these models were in 2019. So this is what's referred to as a graph database. And then we go to the next level. This is where we combine taxonomies to an ontology. Okay, so notice, for example, we can have a view of different aspects of our database. So we can look at our customers, and these are the different instances of mega customers, Amazon, Best Buy. And then we've got regions, Africa, Europe, Asia. So you can see all these taxonomies that have that hierarchical structure that we know about are then joined by this facet and have these different relationships. And so our controlled activity would relate the hierarchy of customer, region, product, and goal. Hopefully that's making sense. And there you can see again that we have hierarchical structures and then another facet that's under there. So for example, a laptop is made up of a CPU, a screen, the weight, and the battery life. Okay, so it has several components, and I mean, this is sort of what an ontology looks like, and you can see that's quite different to that of a taxonomy. But what's important about that, and just to give you this understanding, is this is almost our metadata of the concepts, that we have a vehicle, and a car is a type of vehicle, and it has different models and manufactured in a year, and it relates to an organization, which is a brand, and we have a design, which is a brand. Okay, so that's really simple. That's a nice way of explaining our relationships of the metadata, and certainly of our business glossary. So this is a really nice way of presenting a glossary and giving it more understanding and meaning. Okay, so the way a knowledge graph develops is normally just your graph database looks something like this. And you can see this is a really nice thing done by Top Quadrant. I really like the presentation. And the orange is instance data. So I've got a document, I've ingested the document, and I've found all of these instances. At the same time, we've developed an ontology that describes these relationships. Now we can take the ontology plus the instance, and we can start saying, the BMW is a type of organization. The BMW X2 is a type of model or design. And now we can infer so much more about what these terms are that we've just brought into our database. And we can start having a lot better understanding of what that document was talking about. So when we search about, we want to look at all car designs, we'll then be able to pick up any of these elements that are related to the design. And then we can say, we've got X2, this document refers to that, and BMW 228. And now we've got a really powerful search engine that links all of these elements together. So this is also just an example of, we have so many websites where we want to build our product catalog, and we can see there that we want to be able to structure these drop downs in many different ways. And we can either bring it from car models down this way, or we can bring it from car types and luxury cars. And we can see BMW 228 actually sitting in multiple hierarchies. And you can get to it using multiple mechanisms. And I think this is really fascinating and important. And this is something we started to do with time series, where we cataloged all the time series for use by the data scientists and the econometricians. So they could say, I'm looking for a time series on GDP. And you can see multiple different ways that you get to that. All right, so other document and content. Are there any questions on that? I'm hoping that gave you a little bit more sense of how important and powerful these knowledge graphs are, and of course how an ontology comes about. Everyone comfortable there, or?
Yeah, good with me. Thanks, Howard.
Okay. Does it help you a little bit more in terms of understanding how we would get meaning from text? So I'm sure, like me, until I started looking at this textual analytics, I always wondered, how did we extract the meaning from this whole massive library of documents?
Making me very excited about DNC.
Yeah, cool, fantastic. I think it's so critical to our understanding, especially when we know that master data is moving in this direction. I'm sure you guys have learned about that. A lot of the latest technologies in master data are now implemented with graph databases, and of course, one would expect there's a knowledge graph part of it as well, so they can label all of these elements in the graph database. So you can pick up relationships between your entities specifically for identification. So it makes your identity search and management a lot better when it comes to master data. Okay, I think I'm dropping a little bit behind you guys. Sorry about that. So we do look at other DNC functions, digital asset management, managing our media. And this is, one always thinks about things like the Truth and Reconciliation, where they had all of those cases, where they had all those interviews and videos. And I don't know if you're aware of the fact that a lot of it has been lost. There were fires and destruction. And that was certainly something that they spoke about with the fires in UCT in Cape Town, is now what do we do with these documents? They've been lost. The originals have been lost. There have been copies, but the original doesn't exist. And then you lose that sort of tamperable thing. Is is a copy non-tamperable? Has it been tampered with? We don't know. Okay, so then we've got a data map, which is an inventory of all our electronically stored information. And then we've got e-discovery, which is information request for evidence in a lawsuit. And then also remember that e-discovery requires the upfront preservation definition. So that's also part of that. Okay, I'm going to jump through these. I think a lot of that is self-explanatory. Information architecture, this is something that I was always battling to understand the difference between data architecture and information architecture. And your information architecture focuses a lot of this, creating structure on the body of information for content. And I actually quite like that, because in the olden days, I suppose when I was just starting, I know Bryn can probably relate to that, where we would information architecture was the flow of documents and content, not just data in a database. It was where did the documents move from this person to that person to this database. That was what it was all about. And then we used the controlled vocabularies, navigation maps, what is the flow, metadata maps, search functionality, and user flow. So helpful to understand that, what information architecture is about. And then, of course, probably one of the critical areas of documenting content is then our ability to retrieve it and search for this information. That's the hardest part. We can have all these documents on our machine and we can't find them. I'm sure you guys have experienced that. I know I do. So we've got the search engine. We've then also got a semantic engine that describes a network of concepts. So, for example, if you search for instant messaging, you will be able to relate all sorts of concepts to that. And certainly that's what Google does such a good job of, understanding those relationships. And then we've also got a semantic search, which can be used for artificial intelligence, query matches, and things like that, where they're trying to look for correlations. All right, so here we talk about the document and content activities. This was the standard one. This is where I believe the data manager plays the role of, is the planning for lifecycle management and the data management and content management strategy. Okay, so these are the two things that our data manager needs to really pay attention to. Great. I'm not sure what's happening. Okay. All right, so those were the essential concepts. Long story. I think there's a lot we don't really know, a lot we don't really understand about document and content. So if you remember data quality, we all pretty much went through it and we knew what that was about and we've had the experience. Documents and content is not as simple as that. All right, so how do we manage the knowledge in content? We want to look after it. If people refer to organizational memory, these are one of the first things that you have to take care of. Now, I do like this work that's done by a guy by the name of Frank Upward. What he tried to do was he basically said he wasn't comfortable with a pure linear life cycle, the data life cycle. He actually felt that there were multiple dimensions to it and a continuum. So he created what's called a record continuum. He looks at the authority in terms of who owns it, who creates it, who are the individuals involved, the business units, the organization, and society. That's on our authority vector. You've got evidential. Where is our record evidence? Archives. We spoke about the truth and reconciliation, where we've lost a lot of those archives. We have to be very careful within that. And then we've got our record keeping, which is your published version. And then we've also got our transactional vectors. Okay, so these are the transactions, but we know that a lot of times there can be digital or document that initiate the transaction. How was that transaction initiated? We were sent an invoice. We received an invoice in the email, and then we loaded it on the system, and then we made a payment, or whatever that, how that comes about. So just the transaction doesn't tell us everything. Okay, so here's a nice description of those different dimensions that we talk about. and how we have to look at all the different aspects of our documents and really the surrounding information that our document and content gives us with respect to the transactions, because that's typically what we see at the end of the, we see these transactions, but there's all this other stuff that's missing that we haven't paid attention to. Okay, cradle to grave. This is, I just wanted to actually show you how lots of people talk about it. They talk about the creating of the document, and then it's the tagging. It's then distributed to users. It's used by the users. It's then searched. And then we go into the process of either destroying it, transferring it, archiving it, or moving the document. And this is all based on policies that the records manager must pay attention to. And of course, the last action is final disposition. And we've got this last action. Now, with Papaya, we are actually seeing that these final dispositions are not as easy as that. For example, if we get a document from a customer telling us, informing us never to use them again, or never to market to them again, we have to keep that document so that we can have evidence of that we are able to, or we're not allowed to advertise to that customer. Okay, so really just a continuously tagging and classifying. As we build our ontologies, we add more tagging and classification, and then we're managing these tags and the metadata. So there's your sort of flow that has to be established by the records management. Okay. All right, so I know I'm getting to the end, and I'll probably really just deal with this next week. This is really about how do we develop a content strategy, and I'll go through it quickly, and if there are any questions we can, I talk about a document strategy. These are the elements that we need to deal with: people, process, technology, and governance across the different life cycle. But this is a very, almost an operational way. I don't really believe this is our strategy. It just has to deal with aspects. But what I do believe is that we have to look at what are our problems that we have with documents, what are the people that we require to manage our content, what are the types of people, and then how do we get to this target direction of data-driven. And I did want to say to you that data-driven is one side of it, but I do believe that the next step is knowledge-driven. Okay, so where we augment our data with the ontologies and the deep learning and conversational AI, where we start to introduce documents to the data that helps us understand this. Okay, I wanted to just go through, I wanted to take you through that. I believe what I do in my data strategies, I build all the SWOTs that come from the business about the problems with document and content. And so getting to the content strategy is first we have to understand the business strategy, what's our value proposition to our customers, then we build a data strategy. We look at the SWOTs within the data strategy, and then we build a content strategy that takes these SWOTs and breaks them up into what it can manage, what's urgent about our document management, what's urgent, what's intermediate about the people, and then our target SWOTs, we want to be knowledge-driven. So we're not going to get the business too knowledge-driven without content and knowledge. All right, any questions? Any observations or questions that you'd like to talk about?
Yikes.
What does that mean?
It means it's exciting, it's daunting, looking forward to the next 3-4 weeks of carrying on with this. Yeah, very exciting stuff. Mm.
Yeah, it really, for me, it starts to explain a lot more in terms of how do we use the world around us and what's been said on Twitter, what's been said on Instagram, what's been said on social networks, what's been published in publications, and bringing all of this information to give us better insight to what's going on. And I'll share a brief story. I was involved with UTI Pharma we did a whole lot of forecasting, and we realized that our forecasting was a mess because in the year, I think it was 2013, we had this massive spike in sales, and we weren't aware of it. But one of the lessons that I learned out of that is you can't forecast across a massive spike in data. And we didn't understand why our forecasts were so bad until someone told us that at that point in time, where we had this nick, they had bought and sold a whole lot of companies that were related to them, or the people that they were doing distribution for. So the distribution was exponentially different. Now, when we just looked at the data, we could see this jump, but we couldn't explain it until someone gave us that context. Yeah. And without that context and understanding, your data is sort of half blind. And I'm sure we know that when we talk about metadata. So we don't have a complete view of what's happened in that time we're battling. I think I also presented a talk on some of the forecasting that we were doing. And, you know, because we don't really understand the context of the data, we're guessing a lot of the times to explain why this happened. And the better approach would be to be collecting information. For example, what was the impact of COVID? When did we have our different lockdown periods? What was when they stopped selling alcohol? You know, what was this all about? And without bringing that data from the outside in, we're really just talking about, we're understanding half of what's going on.
Mm. Yeah.
Any questions? Norman, you've been quiet today.
Yes, I have been. Hello, Howard.
Hey, how are you doing, sir?
Yeah, very well, thanks, mate. What you've shown is awesome. There's a lot to think about here. I've done some content management strategies and then seen it through to embed and business. And one of the issues I found is that the technology at that time, and I'm going back probably about 7 years, where I was even using this for predictive analytics as well. It just wasn't fit for purpose. But recently, I've studied up on machine learning and that, and what is available now, it's extremely powerful, and businesses, they need to understand how it is they can benefit from this. It just removes so much manual effort. The ROI is very good.
It's fantastic. Yeah, and I'd also like to share another story of the Reserve Bank, the central bank in South Africa, called IBM in. IBM was raving about Watson, about how they can do deep learning. And it was interesting where they put forward to the lead economist, they said, tell me what you want. Tell me how things must happen. And he said, here's the challenge. I don't know what I want, and I don't know what I don't know. So I need you to tell me what I don't know.
Brilliant.
And the whole thing just crashed, the whole discussion. And they came in, and the thing that I loved about that presentation, they said, the first thing we do is build an ontology. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. I'd never seen this. And they said that ontology helps us ingest and build a corpus, ingest the data and understand the meaning. Unfortunately, it never got off, and I never had the experience of actually seeing the value of this. But it's really the penny dropped to me in terms of how Watson is managing and understanding these things. And the very first step they talk about is building that domain knowledge and defining an ontology that the machine can be guided with.
Yes, certainly. And this leads through to things like emails that are received immediately. One is automatically pulling out certain search words, the tags and that, and you're building up a lot of metadata.
Yeah.
Such that when you store that email and or attachment immediately, it has a lot of value.
Yes. Yes. Especially if you can extract that meaning. Yeah, if you can pull that meaning out, I think we operate at a completely different level. And we know what it's like for estate agents and everybody like that. All those legal documents, there's so much more content to the final transaction on payment. And just three-quarters of the information is just left behind. And we're now seeing how valuable this is, and not to just work on these standardized boilerplates and templates that no one really understands. You can get so much more meaning and benefit out of it.
So true. Thank you, Howard.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Judy?
Thanks, Howard.
Thanks. Alrighty. Take care. Mr. Bolton, you've gone quiet.
I'm here. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't give you the last say.
It's all good. Cheers.
Okay,
No,
buddy.
No. Have a great evening. Thank you, Howard. Thanks, everybody.
What did you learn? What did you learn about document and content that you didn't know?
No, I think it's that study of that ontology is probably I was just thinking of an experience where thrown in the deep end to bring some change management into an organization that implemented a document repository. Yeah. But the maturity of what we used it for was simply workflow, not applying that understanding of the data and being able to make decisions. That part stands out to me the most. Yeah. I think we didn't even, maybe that was on the roadmap, but it was just we didn't get there. We just fought with change and adoption issues and getting the citizen to understand why this is important. Right. And obviously the data as well is critical, because it was just we had exception report that's probably was my job for the first 2 months, was just clearing those issues, or getting people to clear them, I should say. And we never got to the place of actually understanding the power of what we have now. Yeah. Because I suppose the biggest problem with that is we've brought in some tech. We have some understanding of the challenges that business are facing, but we don't understand enough, right? So we probably the limit of our challenge is, we need something to manage all our documents. Yes. And it's not, well, are we going to get any value out of it? 100%. And it became, the big driver was simply customer getting access to the document, an invoice, because and the return on investment was based on paper saving. And although that be good and right, part of the business case, I think just stopped so short of the power of what they were sitting on in terms of data. Yeah. Excellent. And then, of course, if you are able to understand the content, then it's a lot easier for you to explain to a customer what you know about them. 100%. Behavior. Yeah. Was it in that world? It was about behavior, travel behavior, etc. So. Oh yeah. Cool. So
Just a final comment from me. Again, it's about our wheel. And if I just go back to data management and the structured part of it, if we don't understand the terms and the rules and the metrics and the requirements, managing the data becomes impossible.
Yeah,
So
you're right.
It's definitely a different level, because we've now got this unstructured so-called stuff.
Yes.
So that ontology is critical. So it's the same kind of story that we have to tell, and get the architecture right, get the design right, the understanding. Yeah. Very
100%.
stuff.
Yeah. And sorry, it just reminds me that comment dies is we were ingesting, it's supposed to be structured data, but it was like unstructured because it was from companies that were providing quote invoice data, which was a third part, an on payment, if I can call it that. Howard, you know the company, and we were prepaying vehicle hire, we were prepaying hotel, and so we were bringing in those vouchers. So we would issue a voucher for that car rental or that hotel, and we were pulling in that data, which was it was just crazy data. We need to make sense of it to map it to the relevant invoice that the customer would see as a almost like a verification that we were charging correctly or not.
Yeah, that would be amazing if you could build that bridge between all of those documents that you had and your transactional system.
100%.
Then you could just, these are the transactions and here are all the documents, and also for yourself, you could have validated that you had all the transactions, and you don't have loose documents hanging around.
And then, as you know, there was that third-party credit card matching process.
Oh, yes.
The vision there was also that could have been actually put to bed because you could do it here. You start mapping the transaction, as you said, the transaction to the card statement.
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty cool stuff, but we never got there.
But I think Norman's right. The technology is leaps and bounds. That knowledge graph is fantastic in terms of storing ontologies with document content and stuff like that. So now our ability to navigate and move around and get understanding is phenomenal compared to where it was. We really just dumped everything into a container, and so that's our document management.
And I think also what's, you start to bring indexing of the fields, a simple thing where you're able now to filter or search your search functionality to find and retrieve trails of paper or trails of a transaction becomes so powerful as well. So if you get that right, that indexing.
And to be honest, we've seen the great job that Microsoft's done with SharePoint in terms of indexing the files, and you can do a search, and it's fantastic. You get everything. Where I think the sort of the world wins is when we can link the two worlds together. So that integration and the bridge between the two, where we can say this transaction relates to these documents, or this document relates to these transactions.
Yeah.
And now we can connect the world together that we haven't been doing.
And as you say, I mean, even conversation, that email conversation between an agent and the client, or even if you bring phone into it now. So you bring the phone into it, and I heard it earlier or yesterday was talking about what did you call it when you could pick up the person's attitude in terms of
the sentimentality and textual analysis of call centers, and that then allows you to give the business feedback about the customer's feelings towards the product. I always get frustrated with that, is you phone the call center and then they keep saying to you, but all I'm doing is trying to help you. But your question is, but are you feeding this back to the business? Do the business realize what they're doing?
Yes.
So yes, I agree with you. You as an operator, there's not much you can do about it. I get that. But what is the feedback to the people that need to know?
100%.
Now, if you're automating a lot of that textual analytics and analysis, you can be giving graphs on what the market believes about your products compared to oh, I had 20 calls and I resolved them in average time of 30 seconds.
Yeah.
That's typically the difference, right?
Yes. And obviously, if you're also measuring people's efficiency and relationship with their customer,
Yes.
and you've got teams of people, you start to see efficiencies of that exact same figure, but by team or by person, you know, rather than.
Remember, we looked at that value discipline of customer intimacy.
Yes.
And the AI that was used to measure how intimate IBM was. I think it was a paper on a measurement of IBM's intimacy with their customers.
Yes.
And it analyzed all the emails and looked at the interaction between the IBM team and the customer team across all levels. And they had organograms and things like that, and they could then calculate the level of intimacy that IBM was operating at. You know, now, because that's your core discipline that you're trying to achieve that customer intimacy, surely these things are critical. Emails, interactions, phone calls, call centers, any form of interaction, you need to, it's data that you need to be paying attention to.
100%. And sorry, just back to, I'm thinking about our business case, and I remember just the harping on the money side of saving of paper, or a delivery bloke on his bike, which is all real. And I'm not, you know, the cost of cartridges and printers and all these things is real. But you start talking at this level, this is a different kind of return on investment. That if you can capture that in rands or in dollars or whatever the currency, you start to, your business case just explodes with power, rather than, oh, well, I'm going to save 100 sheets of paper every month.
Yeah, and I'll share with you, I did a data strategy for a customer, and it was people doing research. And, you know, one of the SWOTs that they said, and I was not expecting it, but this one lady had almost 20 challenges that she had with document and content. And it was about, some of her research papers lasted 5 years, and the archiving process was 3 years. And so they were archiving her documents, her research documents. And then she had to go and beg and plead to get them back. When she looked again, they were gone. And she just said, you guys don't know, you know, your whole archiving strategy and your retention. They don't understand the state of the document, where it's at, and what needs to be done to it. So, I mean, that was just simple things of not being and what do we do when we are document records manager, right? Document manager, this is your retention schedule. It's got 3 years. So it was created 3 years ago, but the fact that somebody's still working on it.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's good. She's just thinking of your SWOT, you know, the whole SWOT analysis. You know, you tend to put saving of money against the W, the weakness. You know, let's save the money there. We don't know how to value that opportunity properly. Or when I say we, I'm just saying that experience that I had. We were weak at expressing a value to that opportunity. Or what? So cool, man.
Cool.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Thank you.
Judy.
Cheers.